Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're breaking down Major Gilberto Sambolin Perez's really fascinating review of the academic collection Indo-Pacific Strategies. We're basically going to unpack what is, quite literally, the ultimate global chess match. The Indo-Pacific has absolutely become the undisputed center of gravity for global geopolitics right now. And this collection, edited by Brendan J. Cannon and Ki Hakata, gives us an incredibly detailed look at exactly how superpowers are positioning themselves at the dawn of a totally new age. So we're going to map out the strategies, the key players, and the massive global stakes involved. But before we map out the whole board, just consider this pretty stark warning. Anyone who stands against China will pay the consequences. Wow, right? That is the absolute essence of what's known as China's wolf warrior diplomacy. It's a massive shift from their historical posture, and it perfectly highlights the incredibly high-pressure stakes of who will ultimately control the region's future. It really sets the stage for a geopolitical competition that is just totally unlike anything else in modern history. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. 1. Defining the Indo-Pacific. 2. China's foreign policy evolution. 3. U.S. and Quad counter-strategies. And finally, 4. Critiques and future outlook. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Defining the Indo-Pacific. The chessboard. The book makes a fascinating point right off the bat. The Indo-Pacific isn't just some fixed spot on a map. Instead, it's actually a very fluid social construct. Geographical boundaries completely blur into this highly complex web of alliances, deep trade networks, and really tense political military issues. You can't just draw a neat little line in the ocean. You really have to look at the overlapping spheres of influence. It poses immense geopolitical challenges because every single nation playing the game here is operating in this overlapping multidimensional space. So to build influence within this construct, the text outlines some absolutely massive Chinese infrastructure initiatives. The major ones you've probably heard of are the Belt and Road Initiative, sometimes called One Belt, One Road, and the Maritime Silk Road. These are monumental global infrastructure and economic development projects. But when we look at them in the context of the Indo-Pacific, they're so much more than just building a few ports or highways. These are the physical moves on the chessboard, purposefully designed to expand Beijing's reach. Now, the crucial point the essays make is that these investments have a very specific strategic objective. They are meant to link nation-states directly to China. By funding these expensive infrastructure projects, China creates scenarios where countries become indelibly tied to Beijing. And this link isn't just economic, It often becomes highly political because of the heavy financial debt these developing nations take on. It's essentially a method of earning state backing through sheer financial leverage. Moving on to Section 2, China's Foreign Policy Evolution, Player 1. Part 3 of the book maps out an incredible timeline, tracking how China's strategy has shifted over the decades. It starts all the way back with the establishment of the Republic in 1949 under Mao Zedong, then moves through Deng Xiaoping's massive economic transformations in 1978, and then highlights a really critical pivot in 1991. After the Soviet collapse, China adopted this hide one's capability doctrine, basically keep a low profile and build strength. By 2003, as they grew, that shifted to a peaceful rise. But look at where we are today, full-on wolf warrior diplomacy. They're no longer hiding their strength. They are aggressively pushing back against any opposition. It's just a fascinating progression from quiet development to assertive superpower. And President Xi Jinping's current strive for achievement stance actually takes a four-pronged approach to secure that regional dominance. First, actively seeking political support globally. Second, aggressive maritime control, specifically focusing on the Yellow, East, and South China Seas. Third, leveraging economic globalization to their absolute advantage. And fourth, pushing for sweeping technological transformation. These aren't just isolated policies. They're a highly synchronized strategy to make China the dominant regional power. All right, Section 3, U.S. and Quad counter-strategies, Player 2, and allies. So how do the other players respond? Well, the book heavily highlights the Quad as the primary linchpin here. The Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, is a diplomatic partnership between Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. The text frames this group as a highly viable mechanism to offer a real strategic alternative to China's expansion. By banding together, these four nations are basically trying to dissuade China from becoming the undisputed global power, creating a much-needed counterbalance in the region. The collection also takes a really deep dive into the internal strategies of the United States, impartially tracing how the Obama, Trump, and Biden presidencies have adapted their military commands and resources to this huge geography. It explores the continuities and discontinuities between these different administrations. For instance, it points out the sheer logistical challenges the Trump administration faced trying to allocate resources across such a vast area. And it highlights the Biden administration's focus on reinforcing those existing alliances while building new ones. It's a very objective look at just how incredibly difficult it is to manage a unified strategy across different political eras. But here's where the analysis gets really compelling. The authors point out a fascinating paradox in current U.S. strategy. On one hand, the United States is increasing its overall military deployments and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, projecting more power. But simultaneously, they're actually neglecting significant geographical areas, like the Indian Ocean. Plus, the text notes that the U.S. still doesn't transmit a clear, unambiguous message regarding whether they'd militarily intervene if Taiwan were invaded. So it's this weird paradox of increased presence paired with strategic ambiguity and geographical blind spots. And all of this brings us to the ultimate standoff presented in the text, a clash between two competing theoretical paradigms. On one side, you have Pax Americana, which is a vision of peace and prosperity driven by the United States and its democratic allies. And on the other side, Pax Sinica, peace and prosperity defined and driven by China. Think about it. Everything we've discussed so far, the infrastructure debt, the Quad, the naval deployments, it's all fundamentally a massive contest over which of these two paradigms gets to dictate the future rules of the region. Finally, Section 4, Critiques and Future Outlooks, Post-Game Analysis. Taking a step back, Major Semblin Perez praises the collection highly for a few key reasons. He notes that it offers profound insights into regional cultural intricacies, which is something scholars absolutely have to grasp when trying to analyze Chinese policies. It also provides the deep historical context necessary to really understand China's regional posture. Plus, it does a brilliant job expanding on state-centric narratives, making it a pretty indispensable resource for anyone studying international relations or military strategy in Asia. But, of course, no book is perfect. The reviewer does point out a few areas for improvement. First, the book largely neglects how societal factors and non-state actors influence foreign policy. It's very much focused purely on state governments. Second, he notes a pretty heavy reliance on open-source, internet-accessible documents rather than bringing in groundbreaking new research techniques. And finally, he points out a complete lack of maps and visual aids for visual learners, which, hey, is an irony we are very happily solving for you right now with this explainer. So why does all of this complex analysis actually matter to us today? Well, as the reviewer concludes, understanding the diplomacy, the economics, and the military strategy in this specific region is absolutely vital. The strategies that are playing out right now across the Indo-Pacific are going to dictate the entire international policy outlook for the next 50 to 100 years. This is not just some short-term political dispute. This is literally the shaping of a century. As you consider the vast chessboard we've explored today, from China's wolf warrior diplomacy and infrastructure expansion to the strategic pushback from the Quad and the U.S., ask yourself this: which paradigm will ultimately shape our future? Will the next century be defined by Pax Americana or Pax Sinica? It's a massive question that will absolutely affect us all, and it's one worth watching very, very closely. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the board.